is, guys. We're live. So I tried that little introduction. Hopefully it worked out on our subscribers' end. We'll see if they comment about it. But I want to welcome Brian Wolfe, guys, to DragBoss Garage. It's a big honor to have you here, Brian. I appreciate you taking the time from your family to be here and enlighten us with a lot of Ford history that we're going to talk about. I want to give a big shout out to my family for allowing me to have the time to do this. My wife, Andrea, Izzy and Elena, and our dog, Zeus. So thanks, guys, for being here. I'll tell you some people that are here now. We got Bill Fioretti. He had a question that he wants me to ask you. Rotor 22, Ed Case, JMR, Jim M, Teddy's Gun Shop. Hi, guys. Trunk Back Jim. I appreciate you guys being here. 18 people here already. So Brian Wolfe is a Ford engineer. He worked for Ford for, I want to say 34 years. Is that right?
36.
36. Whoa, I cut it off. Sorry about that. But the story that I've heard about you, and it goes back to the days when I was a kid, just getting into racing and the Pro 5.0 stuff. So just keep that in mind, guys. But we're going to start from the beginning and tell you a little bit about Brian and how he got here and worked for Ford for 36 years. And you're from Michigan, and actually your whole family, if I'm not mistaken, worked for Ford. And you had an aspiration to work for Ford. Am I right?
Well, close. My family was all from Michigan. First, before we go any further, thanks a lot for having me on. Watched quite a few of the videos. Got some great guests that have been on. Kind of honored to be on the show with so many really talented engine people and people from the industry that you've had, and some of the folks that you're gonna have coming up. So really appreciate you having me on. But
Most welcome.
Openly, my oldest brother worked for Ford. He was a tool and die maker. My father never worked for Ford. But Henry Ford was his idol as a child. So because my dad was born in 1912, so if you go back in history, Ford Motor Company was only 7 years old back, or no, it was 1903. So it was 9 years. The company was only 9 years in business. But again, grew up as a young kid, and Dad always saying about Henry Ford and putting the world on wheels, as we've all heard, but then also trying to take care of the workers. We're on the one Christmas day, I forget what year it was, when he had the board of directors wanting to give his employees a raise and actually doubling their wage in that one meeting, because he found a lot of his people, which he thought had a good living, were living in pretty poverty conditions, and he wanted to take care of it. So things like that is the company that I wanted to work for.
Nice. I like hearing that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So what did you? So you wanted to work for Ford for a long time, since a kid. Am I right?
Absolutely.
Like
so
high
growing
school, junior high?
Say again?
When did you have that, epiphany? Junior high?
Oh no, it would have been, I don't know, as far back as I can remember. My brother had a 427 Fairlane, 66 Fairlane that he raced in super stock.
Like it.
And I think I was probably about 8 or 9 years old, and he had it at home, and he started it up, and I was in the passenger seat. So 427 open headers, just big grin on my face ear to ear, and I was kind of bit at that point to become love cars and racing and performance.
Wow, I love that.
So
then you went to, where'd you go to college? Somewhere in Michigan, obviously.
Yeah. So what happened? And I never planned on going to college. My brothers were. My dad was a tool and die maker. The other brother was a tool and die maker. My two other brothers were designers, designed progressive transfer dies, and that was kind of the path I was on. But I wanted to work for Ford, and a good friend of my brother Al and brother Larry was a guy named John Coletti. And they were, they used to hang out on Gratiot and, cruise Gratiot back in the day in the 60s. And he worked for Ford. And he said, Brian's never going to get in to Ford as a draftsman. They're just really hard, very few and far between. If he wants to get into Ford, he's going to have to go to school and get an engineering degree. John was an engineer. So in my junior year of high school, that became clear. But as luck would have it, even though I was taking vocational training, I was, more in the design. I liked math, liked science. So I was, taking chemistry, physics anyways.
Sure.
So I kind of had that college prep curriculum. And then when I had to go to become an engineer, it was, well, what school do you go to? And it ended up being, I worked part-time, about 20 hours a week as a draftsman while I was going to school full-time, and paying for school yourself, was like, well, I went to Wayne State and looked at that, went to Oakland University, looked at that, went to U of M Dearborn, and U of M Dearborn was on semesters instead of trimesters. So you had to pay twice a year instead of 3 times a year.
Right.
And it was about the same for school. In fact, my first year tuition at University of Michigan, Dearborn campus, 12 to 18 credit hours, it was the same amount. It was $284. And I was lucky enough back then as a draftsman, because I was a good draftsman, and I was making, when I started college, I was probably making $7 an hour, and while I was going to, I was making $10 an hour. So, I was making my tuition in, 2 weeks of work, take home. So it worked out pretty good for me. And then I stayed at home while I was going to school.
That's interesting right there. I did the same thing. When I went to school, I worked as a mechanic, at night, whenever I could. I hated math and physics. So when I went to go to college, I had to take non-credit math 3 semesters before I could even go to college. So I would do it at night school, and I'd work at the garage. I worked at a transmission shop, so I'd do the homework at lunchtime. And, I know that whole feeling.
Yeah.
I think sometimes I think back that I wish I was born where, I was probably like 19 or 20 in 1970. Because we're probably similar in age, because I always thought that I missed the muscle car. When I was 10, I remember seeing, I say this all the time because the only memory I really have of Bob Glidden on TV, Wide World Sports, if I got to see it once in a while. But I had a couple guys that had hot rods, a 68 Mustang next door with like a dual exhaust and wheels that I thought was bad. And a guy had a Hemi Super B up the street. But I always wished I was, born earlier.
It's funny you mention that, because I used to say the same thing until the 1982 Mustang came out. And I said,
okay.
And you look at the muscle car era, and, I still own my first car that I bought when I was 15. It's a 1969 Fairlane 428 Cobra Jet Ram Air car. So I bought that for $375 when I was 15. Still own it. Love the old muscle cars. But case in point, the Fairlane, I had it set up more of a, stock eliminator type engine in it. And the best that car ever went was like a 1287. All right. And the 5-liter Mustang that I ran with the GT40 heads and intake, the first time I took it out, it went 1257. And it was like, this was way too easy. And then, that same combination, we ended up going 1160s at 115. And it was a 9-to-1 compression motor, had open headers, stick shift.
Wow.
And, then from there, we did some more modifications. That was the first fuel injected 5-liter, Fox body to run 11s. And then we ended up making some more changes. We ran 10s, naturally aspirated, and then 9s with that, with a lot more modified engine, mechanical roller cam, aftermarket heads and stuff. But so to me, it was like I was born at the perfect time, because, to me, the Fox body 80s, Fords, like I used to tease people, well, I'd love to own a new Camaro and run it, but, they're just cost too much to make go fast. This Mustang's just so easy. And so to me, it was a great time to be a Ford guy and watch the progression of the Mustangs. The Fox bodies through the 80s and early 90s.
That's funny, because at that same time, I built my first engine in 1981 with my dad. I was 16. So I still have my same car, my first car, 69 Cougar. You've seen pictures of it. So I'm a Cleveland man, and they sound nasty with open header, bad. And I saw those Mustangs. We all made fun of them. That 79 Mustang, with that 5-liter, it just was anemic, man. I can still see the chrome air cleaner. I said, I don't want none of that stuff. They got all these problems with it. I think the 79 had a carburetor, and then the fuel injection came out and it had problems. They had like the mass air density stuff. I said, I'm not messing with that.
I don't think there were problems. I would debate that, because, you look at the industry that was built around those cars.
Oh, I know now.
I mean, like back, but they were started in the day. Like you had BBK that was,
Yes.
Just sold, throttle bodies, and look how huge they are now. You had, Muscle Mustangs and Fast Ford, Super Ford. There were multiple Ford magazines, and it was all, predicated because there were so many people, that were performance enthusiasts kind of migrating to that Mustang. And why, you go to the drag strip today, probably the car you actually see the most, and it could be powered by a Ford, it could be powered by a Chevy, it could be powered by, a Noonan Hemi, but is a Fox body Mustang. So I think, and I don't really think there was a lot of problems that I recall anyways with the Mass era. It was just, you had to, work with it and, try to figure out how to adapt what you knew on carburetors, to make the fuel injection, give you the air fuel ratio you wanted. Then you had to figure out how to get around the rev limiter that was set to 5,700, I think, back in the day, and people, you had to rev it higher than that. So it was a pretty interesting time, and a lot of people made a lot of really strong businesses out of that.
And now, like you said, it brought Ford back in the limelight. I look at it now, in retrospect, that was the dawn of a new age for Ford, because, after 74, when all the smog came into place and catalytic converters and all that, their performance went downhill. And that was the rebirth. There's no doubt about that. Someone mentioned it right now. Michael Thompson said the same thing. Ford reignited grassroots heads-up racing with a 5.0 Fox body. They sure did. And like you said, industry. And
I agree with Michael. You look at, the other things that I didn't mention was, you might remember there was like these fun Ford weekends, and then, the Pro 5.0 stuff came out of it.
Yep.
And then, the National Mustang Racer Association, NMRA. But and then after that, NMCA came out, same group, Pro Media. But because they only had the old small block Chevy, which had the same smog they had to meet, and same emission standards, taking the same technical route that Ford and Chrysler had to take, everybody's cars became pretty anemic. But the National Mustang Racers Association came out first because of the Fox body, the number of people racing and wanting to go fast and show who was the fastest with that, while they had other classes. Then it wasn't really until later, I think when the LS came out and people started to look to Chevys again, that the National Muscle Car Association came out, NMCA, right? And that's an all brands, thing. But again, the Mustang thing came out first just because of, I think how, the old go fast, cheap, that Fox body allowed people to do.
How did, what's his name now? Let me think about it for a second. He might be like a mentor for you, but really, wasn't Jim Clark? Wasn't he like pivotal in like the Fox body stuff?
Yeah, Jim Clark definitely was one of my mentors at Ford. And it's an interesting story for those that haven't heard it. So the 5-liter in the Mustang GT, I think a lot of folks know the 5-liter was in there in 79.
Yep.
Then it kind of exited in 80 and 81, and Mustang sales were going down kind of considerably from where they were in 79. And, they were looking at what could we do to make this better. Jim Clark was a manager at Ford, and he had accountability for the 5-liter engine. So in that day, he had accountability for the systems engineering, which means the whole program and getting it into the vehicles and also getting it into the plants. He had all the component responsibility. He had the base engine development responsibility on the dyno and the calibration and certification accountability.
Wow.
So one guy, which was not extremely high up in the company. So at Ford, you have the engineers who report to supervisors, and then their supervisors report to a manager. Jim was a manager. And and Jim said, let me put the 5-liter back in, and, after some, campaigning with the executives and marketing, they said, okay, we'll agree to it. It may give us a little bit of buzz, and we may get 5% of Mustang sales with this 5-liter. And then, Jim was extremely dynamic and had super high expectations. and never, ever, ever took the easy way out. So it would have been easy just to take the current 5 liters, throw it in there, and call a win.
Right.
But Jim told his guys, we've got to do something better. We've got to do an HO 5 liter. So because the 5 liter, I think, was 135 horsepower. So he said, we can put any part in there as long as it's been in production in another prior. So the cam lobe profiles came from an old marine application. The dual snorkel intake came off of some other application. And, they did a few other things to it to at least get the horsepower up to 150. And, then he got called into the chief engineer's office because the chief engineer heard Clark was not just putting this in, he was making some changes, and that had risk. So to give a feel for that, the chief engineer at the time probably had 12 or 1,300 people working for him. Okay. Jim had probably a group of 40. So he was pretty far down the path, and he called Jim into his office and said, Clark, I hear you're making this thing an HO. I don't agree with that. If this thing fails, it's your ass. I'm not going to bail you out on this. It better work. And then he goes back out to his team and he said, well, what did the boss say? Oh, he's super excited about this. We've got to go and make this happen. And they did. And it was in production in about 1 year from the time Jim said, let me do this for you. But Jim was really smart because the naysayers would say, well, how are you going to certify it? Or when are you going to get in? Does it fit? Is it going to drive? And he would just take the keys to the meeting and say, well, would you like to drive it? It's right outside, And they say, well, how are you going to meet emissions? Because, they made changes every year from 82 to 89 when Jim was the manager of that group, always improving performance every year. And they say, how are you going to certify it? It's never going to happen. And you say, well, here's the certification data, So he always had the answers and was able to make all those changes. But I guarantee that never, ever would have happened if Jim Clark wasn't the lead of the 5 liter at that time.
Thanks, Jim Clark. We appreciate that.
And he's still around in Florida.
Okay. Maybe I better get him on here for a live chat, get his story too.
It'd be great. He's got a lot of good stories. And he also was the one that, campaigned for the modular engine starting in 91, which was, pushing into the newer eras, overhead cam V8s and stuff.
Let's take a question here because I don't want to forget. This is Bill Fioretti. He's a great subscriber. He's like my mentor, we'll say. But he had a question. I don't want to forget it. So let me put it up here. And I read them because sometimes people are just in their garage working, not watching us. So they want to hear the question. So that's why I read it. Brian, in your 37 years, well, he's got 37, so the average is good. How did the company's budget and attitude regarding motorsports and performance, target marketing, R&D, product, etc., change through the years?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a great question. In 1982, which was the same year I started at Ford, that's when SVO started. Yes. Because Ford wanted to get back into NASCAR. Mm-hmm. And I don't know the rationale for that. It was before my time at Understanding, but I do know that happened. And, they needed to put the parts in the catalog so that NASCAR could, drive, the NASCAR teams could use them. So that's how it kind of started, getting back into, racing, if you will. But the attitude, as many times it's the guy at the top, as bad as it sounds. So SVO, Ford Performance Parts now, the racing was always in marketing and sales because it was a marketing tool, more than an engineering tool. Okay. And so if the head of marketing and, the top of the house wasn't as interested in racing, the director of the group really ran and dictated what was going on. And, some of the guys had the attitude, my job is to support the teams, win races. If marketing does anything with it, that's on them, not on me. When I ran Ford Performance, I was the director of Fourth North American Motorsports for a while. My view was if I'm here to supplement marketing, so I'm getting money from marketing that could have been used for, commercials, incentives, God knows what, to help sell more vehicles, I need to make sure what I provide them has value to them. Otherwise, why am I'm just, a node in the corner, not doing much, right? So that was my attitude. And my attitude when I ran the group was every performance enthusiast, regardless of what they like, whether it's street rods, whether it's street Mustangs, whether it's road racing, whether it's NASCAR, drag racing, they're all important because every one of those people are spending their money, their time to, polish the oval. If they're a participant or if they're a fan, you want to give them, something that they can be proud of.
Sure.
So I try to focus on everything, even though, my passion's always been drag racing, but it's only one small segment in the whole motorsports world. And I felt we had to, take advantage of that. So I can't speak for everything in it, but, today, Jim Farley is a big performance enthusiast, as people know, big road race fan. And, I think sets the pace for a lot of what's done. And back about maybe 10 years ago, they did split Ford Performance, where they kept Ford Performance parts and they took it out of marketing and sales and they put it in vehicle personalization. So that's where the performance parts are. And the racing they did put under engineering, which I still think is a bit odd. Even though we do use engineers, from mainstream to help with the performance and the racing. The real reason for the racing is not to develop a new product, but it's to really, stimulate the market and get people interested in buying Ford vehicles.
Let me ask you a couple of questions. Chronologically speaking, there was SVO. Then did it turn into Ford Motorsport and then Ford Racing?
Well, it kind of bounced through a couple things because there's two entities there we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
You're right. There was SVO. You remember the SVO Mustangs in 86, 85, and 86, I think.
Okay.
And then there was SVT.
Yes.
And then I think Ford Performance, and that was kind of the vehicle side. And then the performance parts, I think you're right. I don't know. I think, because it was the SVO catalog to start with.
Right.
And then it was Ford Racing, right? And then now it's Ford Performance Parts.
Okay.
So they evolved, and I'm not one that liked any of the changes in names because I felt you're building a brand, and each of the Ford Motorsport Parts, it's a great name. Why change the name? I felt SVO was great. I felt SVT was great, but then then you go to Ford Performance, and sometimes I think it's the senior executives wanting to just put their stamp on something with the name as opposed to. But to me, what it loses is, especially at the SVT, because it was there so long, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, they don't love me anymore. They got Ford Performance on everything, that SVT, and it's just kind of silly. I always thought, stick with the brand, the name, and keep building it stronger. Don't change the name.
I like that too.
I mean, because he could have changed the name of the organization, because I'm okay with, like, internally, if you say, hey, we're going to have Ford Performance, and it's going to encompass these things. It's going to cover, Ford Racing, it's going to cover SVT, vehicles, and it's going to encompass something else. But I'd still keep those strong brands that were developed externally.
Thank you for clarifying that. What about, like, I raced the A3 head. It was the first aluminum head Ford made. Basically, it was a Highport Cleveland head, like behind. Then came, the B3, the C302, then the C3 Yates, that kind of stuff, that progression. How involved were those cylinder heads?
Not very. I used those when I was racing in Pro 5.0. So I used the C302B heads, and I used the Yates head. But I was not in Ford Performance at that time. I was a user of the product, but not the developer. When I was at Ford Performance, in conjunction with Roush Yates, the FR9.
What did you see the difference? You know, the C302B head is a canted valve. It's a Cleveland combustion chamber as compared to the C3, which is the Yates. What performance difference did you see between those two cylinder heads?
Well, the biggest thing, on all the Yates heads and, the C3 and the D3 was, I thought it was the valve train, because, everything was shaft mounted rockers.
Okay.
Which is, was really stiff, where I think my C302Bs, I still had like the pedestal rockers with the stands on the top and stuff like that. So to me, the valve train and the valve train stiffness was really, really critical. I always thought that was, one of the sensitivities on the Cleveland was, trying to keep that valve train robust.
Okay. How about combustion chamber? Did you notice much difference with that?
Not that I recall.
Okay.
No. Yeah.
Here's a good question here. Rotor 22. Brian, did GM get it right by sticking to push rods versus Ford going with overhead cams? Question. The LS is taking the place of the old 5-liter Mustangs, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. It's a fair question. I think if you look at the Coyotes, right, and also in the trucks. So the trucks kind of went to the 4.65, 4.68s. Mm-hmm. I think they worked really well at their times versus what we had legacy-wise. I think the LS is a great engine. I think it's obviously, it's everywhere. And because it's been out for so long, you can go to the junkyards and you can, start to accumulate the parts pretty inexpensively. But again, if you go to the Coyote and you look at a couple classes where those compete heads up. So let's talk a little bit about factory stock showdown, which is the Cobra Jets, which we may want to talk about a little bit because I played a role in that. The Cobra Jets, the Copos, and the drag packs. Okay. So if you look at those, the Mustangs we started with the 5.4s and they put Coyotes in them, and the factory showdown classes now where they run heads up, no indexes. But the Ford with the Coyote in it had to take, I think it's 5, if not 6 hits, if you will, based on NHRA because the performance was above, the Camaros and the drag packs couldn't compete.
Okay.
And so the way they did that was changing the pulley size on the blowers and the dampers to give the less blower speed. The Camaros throughout its history, I think, took 2, maybe 3, and I think the Dodge took 1. So all these cars are running, and they're in the Ford, is a production-based engine. It's a production-based head and block and crank. Well, I take it back on the crank because they just changed it. They did change the crank to a longer stroke. But the Copos run an LSX. LSX was never in a production vehicle.
Okay.
Because the LS was lifting heads as he started to make some big power, and they couldn't keep head gaskets in, so they had to go to the LSX, which has more head bolts. The Coyote had the advantage because it's only a 3.93 bore spacing. So again, as you're putting all that pressure in the cylinder to make the power, it's not, you don't have that cantilever pushing it out as far because a small block Chevy is a 4,400 bore space. Small block, the Hemi, which small block, is a 446. So while the big bore spacing was good for power, it wasn't as good for durability because of that physics. So I think the Ford was very, very competitive. But I think the thing that makes the LS, and I agree with you, maybe taking the place of the 5-liter, is it was so compact. It's a really nice small package. The Coyote, when we go to swap it and other packages, it's wide. Like, let's talk about one of my other favorite engines, the Godzilla, which came out in 2020, which I also played a key role in. That engine is 5 inches narrower than a Coyote, but yet it's 445 cubic inches versus 302 cubic inches because it is a conventional cam and block engine. And I think you'll see as time goes on and more, economical builds become available where you don't have to start with a brand new engine and then start doing modifications. I think that you're going to find a lot of people doing it because it is super easy to get a daily driver 600 horsepower Godzilla. I mean, there's 2 cars already with one has a completely stock engine with headers and a cam change in a light Fox body Mustang that went 980s. Right? Yeah, it's had a cam change and went 980s. Then Dave Henderlong, who's a Ford engineer, has a old Thunderbird that he used to have an LS turbo in. He put the Godzilla in it, and he's got a set of our Willis Performance Stage 1 heads, which are slight port to them, CNC, and that same cam that Mike Des ran. And in his Thunderbird, he went 992. So, I just think how much effort I had to put into that 302 to go 9s. And here you got cars you can drive across the country, and with that. So I think as the Godzilla, it already has an enormous aftermarket support in only 3 years, but it's going to grow immensely too.
It's amazing. And they have AC and a radio and power seats,
Yeah. Those guys didn't have all those niceties. They were you could drive them like Dave drives his car-to-car shows and all that. And he still runs stock exhaust manifolds on his car, no headers even. So So I mean, they're quite impressive packages.
It's amazing. So that kind of gives us a segue into the Cobra Jet Mustangs. They're amazing. I've seen a couple in real life. I always wanted one. I mean, you look at it, it just comes from the factory like that, like the old days. They started in what, 2008?
Yeah, 2008. So a little bit of the story behind that. Before I went to Ford Performance, I was a director of a group called Core and Advanced Power Training, where we had accountability for computer, the ECU that controlled the engine, along with the calibration and certification of the vehicles, along with many other things. And when Ford Performance would ask for some help, like whether it's, certification or software help, I was always very helpful. And a guy named Mike Pistelny and another guy named Jimmy Ronzello, who were NHRA stock and super stock racers for many years, said, hey, NHRA is trying to get the factories back in and offer some cars, but the Ford guys that are there, they're not real active, So I called up the guy who I would always help with stuff, Ford Performance Parts. And I said, I'd really appreciate if we could maybe get a little bit more into this and maybe I can help. So we started about doing, maybe something, the Ford Performance doing with me, push him from outside. And the guy that was in kind of the marketing group at Ford Performance Parts at the time, or Ford Racing, as they were called, named Jesse Kershaw, sent me a presentation that he was kind of pushing for the previous 2 years with the management at Ford Performance about doing a Cobra Jet, and I read through it. I go, this is perfect. It's very simple. And I sent an email after I got it. I was always pretty good on staying up with the email. I read it probably within an hour of getting it and sent a note to the guy in Ford Performance. Said, hey, we need to look at this. This is the right thing to do. And next thing is at this other guy's desk. What are you telling Brian Wolfe? So long story short, we were having meetings with them on how could you get this car in production and how would you do it. But they never thought they'd have to do it. They were just doing it kind of to appease me because they needed my help with other stuff, right? Mm-hmm. At that time, I was a fairly senior executive in the company. So about 2 months later, I got transferred and I was now running Ford Performance. So, wow. So like the look on those guys' face was, oh shit, now we've got to do this thing. And but I said, we're not going to do it like some of the other cars where we've got them sitting in a warehouse. That's stupid because it's a waste, so it's a waste. I said, we're going to put a note out and we're going to say, here's a car, here's a price to the dealers. And if we get 50 orders, committed orders with deposit, we'll do the car. If we don't, we're not going to do it. It doesn't hurt my feelings. They had like 70 or 80 orders within 48 hours.
Wow.
So long story short, we did the car, we delivered them in 2008, so they could be certified as 2008, which was critical to me because that was the 50th anniversary. And that's how the 2008 Cobra Jet happened. So, and then we, when I was there, we did a 2010 and had a 2012 going as well.
How much were those cars? Like, how much did it cost a dealer to have one of them?
I don't remember exactly. I want to say the 2008s were somewhere in the $74,000 range, maybe.
Wow. Okay. And then, of course, the dealer's going to mark it up X amount of dollars to cover.
Yeah, I think. Oh, I don't know. I think that was retail. I don't remember the dealer cost. I think it might have only been $5,000 markup on them.
Okay. Damn. And they all had. Go ahead.
Well, the one thing I was wrong on those cars is I thought if we made 50 every other year, there'd be collectors that would want them and there would be racers that would want them. So I thought they would really hold value similar to like a 68 420 Cobra Jet. But and if you look at prices of used Copos, used Cobra Jets, you can't get for them what you paid for them. And what I missed was all those cars were VIN cars that could be street driven, right? So there's not many people that own a 69 Cobra Jet that are driving them daily, one of the first 50 that were made for Pomona, but you could. So because these cars were never, Ford, drag packs, Copos, I think that's what really kind of hurt the collector value of them, where it's not the same interest because they were pure race cars.
So when those cars came out, I think they had Goodyear tires, Goodyear slicks.
I think they had Goodyear's a couple. I think Goodyear's the first year. I know they had Hoosiers a couple times, and so they changed that around a little bit.
So how does it decide we're going to have Goodyear tires, and who made the shocks? How does it? They were aftermarket parts.
Right.
Ford, right?
Yeah. So, my view was on those cars is we have to offer the canvas to the racers, right? Is my view, even though, engineer, I was an instructor at University of Michigan, respect all the engineering. I also have, a lot of people I know that are in the aftermarket and racing, and particularly when you race heads up class. I said, no matter how much work we put into this to get into production, once the racers get it, a Chris Holbrook, Tony Bischoff, Anthony DeSoma, he does race those, but Tony dabbles in some of the builds for those as well. They're going to make it better. So the main thing we have to do is make sure it's the right canvas. The specs are right for NHRA, so the racer can have the latitude to, develop cams on end, work on the blower combinations, work on the rest of the vehicle. So I wasn't as infatuated with proving how much we could put into it as opposed to making the canvas correct that the car could be developed ongoing. So again, because especially something like tires, especially, you're going to run a cycle only so many times, and you're going to put a different tire on it, or either the same tire, or you may try a different brand no matter what. So, some of the stuff is more important than others, but the biggest thing was getting the specs right.
And Calvert had one, didn't he? John Calvert had one, and that's where they really kind of got the ET down, wasn't it? Didn't he set a record?
What happened was in 2008, John Calvert won the 2009 Winter Nationals at Pomona with a Cobra Jet that was owned by Brett Hayek. If you know who Brett Hayek is, he's a super Ford enthusiast, has his own Ford museum. And when he heard these cars were coming out, he bought the first 10. And then he had 4 of them sent to different people so that they could run them at Pomona. So he took delivery in December, and they ran them at Pomona Winter Nationals only a few months later, right? And Calvert won the Nationals. And Brett, being a Ford historian, had these 4 cars set up in livery of the original Cobra Jets. So the original car that won Super Stock F, I think it was, at the Winter Nationals when it was released in '68, was the Rice Holman car.
Johnny,
And Calvert's car had the Rice Holman livery on it. So I mean, you couldn't have written a better storybook than that. So it was pretty cool. But that wasn't John's car at the time. That was Brett's car.
Yep.
John has a couple Cobra Jets now of his own that he does race. The new ones. He also has his 68 still.
I was just talking to Al Joniak the other day, who drove that Rice Holman Cobra Jet.
Yeah.
So he's going to be on for a live chat. He's got quite a story to tell.
He does. Yeah, he's great.
Let's see. Here's one. Anthony Iacovino. He's from Las Vegas. He works at the Shelby Museum. Hey, Brian. I work with a gentleman at Shelby who was involved with Ford marketing early 70s through Fox years. He speaks highly of you. Hank Dershin. He was very sad when Moose Nolan passed.
Yeah. So Hank. That was nice of Hank, and I appreciate that. I've known Hank. Hank was in Ford Performance or in Ford Racing, excuse me, when I was doing all the Pro 50 stuff.
Okay.
So he was the one when we first got the GT40 stuff. It was through Hank, and as we progressed the car, really Hank played a huge role in that, and so did a guy named Don Walsh, who unfortunately passed away just recently as well. Yep. Mose Nolan was a legend in Ford Performance. Mose was involved with most every performance program Ford was in from the early from the 60s, and then when Ford Racing started up again in '82, he was he went into there. He was a super gentleman, super smart, and so one of the story about Mose was I call, if you ever know them, people that understand Ozzie and Harriet, very proper family, high morals and all that. That was Mose. I mean, he is the perfect gentleman. Super. Couldn't say enough good things about him. So last thing you'd expect was at the '66 Le Mans when Ford won was for Mose to grab the French flag and steal it and bring it back to America. But he did that. So it's kind of a funny story about Mose. And Mose also was the engineer when I was in Ford Performance when we did the Pro Stock motors. So Mose did the two versions of it, both the Hemi and the Wedge. That's a sad story for me because right after I left, I had money put aside in the budget to continue to support the programs and try to bring more racers in. But the fellow that took the job after me just cut the program right after I left, which was very, very disappointing.
Well, I had a live chat on a while back with Darren Morgan, and the guy that bought all the parts, the JC51, put it together and had a running engine. I mean, the thing was making, I forgot now, 1,400 and something horsepower. I mean, the most you can make out of 500 cubic inches is 1,500 horsepower, Darren said. Can't make any more than that. And that engine was making right up there with like a single 4-barrel and a cast manifold. It wasn't even that nasty, and it was making good power. Now, that was the Wedge, the JC51, correct?
Yeah, we did a JC50 and a JC51, and I think the 50 was the Hemi and the 51 was the Wedge. The few people that tried to race it, like Larry Morgan, were racing with the Hemi type design. And and the JC nomenclature came from a guy named Jim Cunningham. Yes. Jim was a big Ford supporter, and he was racing. He bought like all of Glidden's old stuff and was trying to qualify with it, and having a lot of fun. But Jim came to me and said, "We need new parts." I said, "Jim, I'd love to, but I don't have the budget to do that." Jim offered to pay for the tooling if we would produce it. So we proceeded with the program, and then I was able to scrounge enough money from other bits and pieces of budget, and I told Jim, "Don't worry about it. You don't have to pay for it. We got it covered." But he was the stimulus to, we needed to do something to get better quality parts so the Ford racers would have a chance.
Yeah, thanks, Jim, for doing that. Appreciate it.
Yeah, Jim has passed away as well. Yep. Yeah, but he did have Erica driving for him for a while, so that was nice. Well,
I talked to her today, Erica Enders, and she's going to be on for a live chat too. We're just trying to get her schedule figured out because she's busy too. Everyone is. You know, you're retired now, but you still work. What company do you work with? Is it Willis?
Yeah. So what we did was, you know, I've always loved engines, and you know, as I retired from Ford,
Yep.
you know, when you're in management, you know, senior executive, you don't kind of do the hands-on stuff anymore. So even though I raced, you know, pretty much all the time that I was working at Ford in one way or another, when I got out, I said, well, you know, I kind of want to open my own little engine shop. I want to keep it small. You know, don't want to. I already had, you know, big jobs with lots of stress. So I opened, you know, this Willis Performance, which is a small shop on the property, same property my house is.
Yep.
Put a dyno in, and I dedicated my time to, because you know there's lots of great engine builders out there already, but I wanted to kickstart the aftermarket with the Godzilla, because while it was designed to be an extremely good truck engine, very durable and reliable, the same things that make it durable and reliable has strength also makes it a very good candidate for performance. But the cylinder head design was also very, I think, exceptional for a factory engine. You know, we, without trying, over 2 years ago, we made over 800 horsepower, or we made about 800 horsepower NA with it. Okay. With stock block crank cylinder head castings with a Pro Charger, we've made about 17-ish hundred horsepower with it, with the stock head gasket still. And that car, we went 464, I think, at 161 at 3,050 pounds. So, you know, pretty good for stock cylinder head casting, stock block, stock crank, stock head gasket. But when I started Willis Performance, it was, I think this engine is going to be very good, but we're going to have a few aftermarket parts. So companies like Wiseco jumped on board really quickly with piston offerings. They got K1 rods to start to do a cost-effective rod. Calais got on board quickly to do connecting rods that were all made in the United States, and camshafts. You know, they've since offered billet main caps as well. MGP, of course, for connecting rods. I worked with Daily Engineering on a dry sump pan for it. Worked with Jessel on a belt drive. So it's very gratifying when I see other people now starting to that are going to take these engines pretty seriously. The tough, you know, the good parts, the really good parts are already there. And then more recently, working with Brian Tooley Racing has been very, very exciting for me. You know, they were mainly LSs, you know, as most people know, they know Brian Tooley. That was the majority of their business. But starting PRI 2022, I got to know Brian through Rick Smith, who's a big Ford guy, and he, you know, owned Trick Flow, and now he works for Brian. He founded Trick Flow. And, you know, talking about this, and we just, you know, recently they came out with a new intake for it that's very cost effective and very low profile to help the engine fit under the hood of a stock Mustang. And they got a lot more really cool parts that are going to be coming, working with some fastener companies like P1. It's a very high-end fasteners. They have a head stud kit for the Godzilla now. So, you know, pretty much, you know, anything you want to do, you know, is available. Also, a couple other companies that, you know, there's individual port throttle available for it now too. So the stacks the atmosphere. So you open the hood, and it looks like you have hellborn injection. Company called Indie Power Products that makes, you know, custom front cover and oil pan systems, so you can fit it into multiple different types of vehicle, including the Cobra kit cars. Is becoming an extremely popular engine in those. But I mean, there's just a lot that's available right now. And we did an engine. It was now the negative side of it. Like, it's real easy. Like I said, to get 600 horsepower engine that we're doing a little bit of development on right now. It's a stock bottom end. So completely, you know, never had a piston out of it. It's got a camshaft in it. It's got one of our stage 1 cylinder heads on it that was done with Visner Engine Development, VED, for those that know Dave. And Dave's been instrumental to the performance progression of the aftermarket as well, with his cylinder head offerings for it. but with those heads at stage 1, we call them, that Dave came up with, and the Innovate Stacks Atmosphere. I'm sorry, take that back. I was confusing that with a different motor. So just Dave's heads, a cam, stock intake, stock throttle body. We had a set of ultimate headers on it that fit in the Fox body. 630 foot-pounds and 630 horsepower.
Wow.
When you think about, it is, I will give it, yes, 440 cubic inches. So I say, you think of what you have to do at Cleveland to get 630 horsepower. It's not like falling off a log. What I described as falling off a log, right? But it's a tight package. It's actually narrower than a Cleveland. But again, it's got 100 cubic inches and it's got a pretty good head from the factory. It's an 8.8 degree valve angle with a 1.8 cant on it. So I'm pretty, it works pretty good. And then when we take a combination like that and we put an 11-to-1 piston in it and that Innovate intake, we're over 700 horsepower, 715 horsepower, 600, I forget the torque. But it's less torque because they're shorter runners, but than the stock has. But some pretty good stuff, and these are all pretty mild builds, relatively speaking.
So let's talk about that Godzilla. I don't know a lot about it, but I know it's got 6 main bearings. What are the advantages, or what are some of the advantages of that engine block? We'll start with that. The cams in the block.
Yeah, so let me tell you, it only has 5 main bearings, but it has and I'm very careful about the way I talk about this because I forget that the LS came out a long time ago, and some people don't know the history of the old conventional small block Fords, small block Chevys, etc. So a lot of people that knew about the LS but never really knew much about the conventional small block Chevy. You look at the Godzilla and said, well, it looks like an LS. And I have to, go into this whole dissertation that the 1991 462 valve, LS came out in 97, I believe, was a deep skirt block, cross bolted main, 2 down, 2 across. And then when we went to the 4 valve, it was 4 down, 2 across, like the LS. The conventional small block Chevy was a short skirt block. So the block is very, very strong. Deep skirt, 6-bolt mains, cast iron. As I told you, the horsepower we made with it, and that was without the billet caps. That was with stock main bearing caps on it. It's a forged crank in it from the factory, 3.98 stroke. It's a factory bore size. It's 4.22 inches, 4.22, and the bore spacing is 4.53. So it's it's in that small block range, and the deck height is 9.65 inches. So it's nice because it fits in a lot of stuff, very, very easily. You start to go up. The cam is pretty high. I forget it's a higher cam than a conventional small block Ford. So kind of like anything else, I call this like a factory stroker motor. Because if you look back at the compression height and the rod ratios we used to run back in the 60s versus where the technology is taking us, it's a lot different. So that's why, the package side is roughly between a Windsor and a Cleveland to fit it into something. It's got hydraulic roller lifters from the factory, 3/8 push rods from the factory, roller rocker arms from the factory, not roller tip, slider tip, but roller fulcrums. With an investment cast, it's a really nice rocker arm. And, we've run those on, the dyno past 7,000 continuously and work really, really well. Then the fuel injectors themselves are in the head, not in the intake. So when you start to do intake swaps and stuff like that, it becomes real easy on the dyno. Don't even have to break the fuel line. And that's about it. So it's a pretty, basic, engine. It's 4 head bolts. The 2 things I'd say, I talked about some of the good stuff. Let me talk about stuff that isn't as easy. Because this engine was designed to go into a truck and only into a truck from the factory, the oil pump is a variable displacement oil pump, but it goes down below the deck face, driven off the chain with the jack shaft going to the back to run the variable displacement oil pump. So when you go to packages and other things, that becomes a bit of a challenge, but there are solutions to that. And then the other thing that makes it difficult to take advantage of that 4.5-inch bore space is it does have a saw cut between the bores to help with cooling, because cooling on these Super Duty trucks that are towing 20-some thousand pounds up at grades and through hot weather, they need to really protect cooling. So that's another thing that kind of stops you from taking full advantage of it.
That gives me a little insight. Yeah, I don't know that much about that engine. You know, it's coming out now, like you're saying, with all the performance parts. So it's going to be the new go-to, I think, for a lot of people.
Yeah, it is. And like I tell people, you know, it's so cool to me to have Ford enthusiasts have two extremely good V8 options today, right? The Coyote, you know, to me is the best engine Ford ever made. To me, it will challenge any engine by any manufacturer because, again, roughly 100 horsepower per liter, oil change every 10,000 miles, have a nice day. Don't have, you know, I mean, you know, Ferraris are, you know, require a bit of maintenance, right?
Yeah.
And other high performance V8. So I think that's an extremely good engine that a lot of people have gone to and are doing great things with it. This is just a different way to get horsepower.
Now, I know you mentioned this before, and I'll put it up, and I think it's the guy that did the heads. Brian Wolfe, did you EVDVH? Is that what you were talking about before about the cylinder heads?
Where did you?
EVDFH.
I'm not sure what he's asking.
Okay. That's all right. We'll keep going. Here's an interesting one. One of my fans, or my hero, not fan. I'm the fan. Did you ever have any dealings with Bob Glidden?
Very little.
Okay.
Just a little bit. When him and Billy, they did one of the events. They were doing a Cobra Jet race between Billy and Bob.
Okay. Yeah.
I forget where it was. So I talked to him a little bit during when he was putting that, when he, you know, participated in that, but very, very little direct interface with Bob.
Okay. David Romanski, hey, good to see you. Brian, did you ever work with Don Sullivan on any motorsport parts? He was involved in the NASCAR V6 well into the 80s at Ford. He was my neighbor growing up.
Yeah, no, I never, nope. Another legend at Ford, but I didn't get to never work with Sully. When I was interfacing with Hank Dershon in the 80s, you know, Sully was, you know, the guy in the room. He was designing, working, but he was, you know, working, like you said, on the NASCAR stuff, not the stuff that was working with Hank that was more, you know, catalog focused parts.
One of the things we talked about before that's kind of interesting is, and I think you're going to have to figure out the timeline. Now, you worked in Europe with Ford Powertrain. Am I right?
Yeah, twice. So I was there in Germany from 1999 to 2002.
Okay.
And then I was in England from 2012 to 2015. So
you went from Germany to England sometimes a couple times a week?
Yeah, for when the first time I was there, the role I went over to fulfill was chief engineer of inline gas engines. And it was supposed to be a 3-year assignment. I was there for a year and a half. I said, boy, we'd really like if you could come over to England and run European powertrain as installed. So that was basically everything but base engine and base transmission. So I said, yeah, I'd be fine to do that. But, you know, my family's really settled into Germany. I don't want to kind of have 2 1.5-year, you know, houses. So as long as I can keep the family here and, you know, go back and forth, you know, a few days in each place, then I'll be glad to do it. So, yeah, so that's how I ended up doing a lot of travel on the Ford plane.
What, a private jet?
It wasn't a private jet. Because Ford had two engineering centers in Europe, one in England and one in Germany. So there's a lot of reason for people to go back and forth. So it is probably a plane that carried, maybe 100 people, and then they'd fly it, back and forth daily.
Wow.
And it was normally pretty full. Yeah, different times.
I love that, hearing that kind of history. The when you raced, when you got into the beginning of NMRA, who were the guys that you kind of hung out with? Like Joe Da Silva? Let's see, I'm trying to think of other guys who were back then.
Well, there's Joe, obviously Joe Da Silva,
Yep.
Super, another
Stormy Norman.
Yep, yeah. I was gonna say Joe Da Silva, another saint of a guy, who's I think getting back into some heads-up racing coming up pretty soon. Storm and Norman, of course, was kind of the nemesis. There was Nitrous Pete.
Yep.
There was Jimmy LaRocca. I'm gonna kill myself for that. I mean, I can see his face. Lee Rudder, of course. Doug Mangrum, Texas. Don Walsh was, racing then as well as Don Senior. Obviously, many more. Dwayne Guttridge was out there as well, Big Daddy. There's a lot of folks that were, again, in that 5-liter Mustang, triangulation. But I backed away from it in around 92. I think the best we went. Oh, and don't forget Gene Deputy, Texas Turbo.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, obviously.
Anteater.
Pardon? Yeah, the Anteater. Yep. So, but two things. Like in '92, the job at Ford was getting a bit more demanding, and that's when they started to really, again, like anything in racing, it evolves, right? So they kind of went from, almost daily type drivers to kind of back half cars to chassis cars. So when they kind of made that transition from, going more towards chassis cars, that's when you said, okay, I can't really keep up with this financially and working and family and everything else. And I think we went at best like 835 at about 165 with the red car that we raced in Pro 50, and still have that car today as well. So.
I love that car. I saw some pictures of Reverend Evan. He did an episode at your shop, I think.
Yes, he did. Yeah.
I had to watch that today to make sure I get everything straight.
Yeah, with all the intakes we ran on that and how that developed, through the years.
It was amazing. That one that had the what did it have, a dummy mass airflow sensor or something on one side of the intakes?
Right. Yeah. So we did. Yeah, it had two throttle bodies. So we put. With the computer we were running at the time, because again, there wasn't much in the aftermarket available. So what we did was we just want to make both sides of the air induction look identical, then take the signal from one mass airflow meter and then double it in the calculations to deliver the correct fuel. But we wanted equal restriction on both sides.
How are you reading that data? I mean, you didn't have race packs back then, right?
Yeah, well, we didn't. Probably other people did.
Oh.
But basically it was, and we didn't have O2 feedback either. It was all open loop stuff. So it was, pretty much from the best we could read at the time off the spark plugs and how the car actually performed going down the track. It was pretty crude.
Nice.
Yeah.
Now here's a good question for you. Frank Cape Copen, because it's a truck engine, what does it weigh, long block?
Yeah, there's a whole video Evan did with me, Reverend Evan.
Yep.
And if you go to his site, you can see it. Or if you go to willisengines.com, so WILLISENGINES.com, and then click on photos and videos. I have them all kind of categorized there. And there's one there where we talk about the weights. That being said, I weighed them in the shop, no exhaust manifolds, no FIAD, because again, if I got cast iron manifolds on this engine and tubular headers on the other, well, I could put tubular headers in both. So they were basically complete engines less front end accessory drive, less exhaust manifolds. The Coyote that we had weighed about 404 pounds ish. The Windsor, so it was a 9.5 deck height Windsor with aluminum heads and aluminum intake. It was basically the stocker motor that I ran in my Cobra Jet. Mm-hmm. I want to say that weighed around 470 to 480, and I think the Godzilla weighed about 50 pounds more than that. I could be wrong, so please don't take those as gospel, but if you go to that website, scroll down, find the video that says we discussed the weights. You can play it real quick, and it'll give you the accurate numbers. And we also go through the dimensions of the engines. So we say, hey, here's the length, here's the width. Height is kind of a little flaky because it kind of depends on the intake you put on it.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's all there and documented.
How did you come up with the name Godzilla? I mean, to me, it sounds like some massive engine that's bigger than anything they ever made.
Yeah, well, the thing is, it's like everything changes with time. So we'll come back to it bigger than anything made. So here's what happened. So the engine was never going to be as it is produced. So when I came back from Europe, I became the director of global engine engineering. And so I was accountable for every engine designed and developed by Ford globally. So that's about 1,300 engineers in North America, Europe, South America, China. So I reviewed all the programs. When this one was coming through, the first prototype series was already there. And what it was a larger variant of the 6.2 liter that was in the Super Duty and also at one time in the Raptor. To be totally transparent with everybody, I never liked that engine a lot because I thought, while I love the nostalgia of it looking like a 427 single overhead cam, it was a big motor. And I couldn't point to anything that said it was better than the two truck competitor engines. So the reason the engine was being developed initially was to replace the 6.8 V10 for dynamometer certification vehicles that leave the factory as incomplete. They have to run a dyno cert cycle, and we needed to improve the CO2 or fuel economy emissions on those vehicles on the dyno cert. So that was the program. So when I reviewed it, I said, man, it was hundreds of millions of dollars to program because we were doing all new tooling for a new plant at the time. So I just said, I don't think it's the best way to spend the shareholders' money and the company's money, and prove to me it is before I take this for the next level of approvals. So that's when the engine was redesigned to a cam and block engine. And, we took a lot of money out of the cost, a lot of money out of the investment to make it happen. And the engineers, to their credit, I think did a fantastic job because they lost one prototype phase and still, have an engine that, I think is, extremely, extremely good. So that's how that came. But where did the name come from? At Ford, we got the Coyote, we had the Monster. The engines get names. We had Panther, in Europe, and Fox, and all these names. So the department manager, Jerry Beamer, that was the systems manager, came to me and said, hey, we guys do a little naming thing. They want to name the engine, and they want to call it the Wolfe. We got a Coyote and the Wolfe. I said, there is no way in hell you're going to call it Wolfe. I'm just not that narcissistic to want things named after me, I guess, to put it blunt. So he goes, okay, all right, well, the second choice was Godzilla. I said, okay, cool, whatever you guys want, I don't care, but I don't care as long as it's, don't name it after me. So that's where the name came from.
Okay.
And again, if you look at this engine versus a 460, a Hemi, a big block Chevy, it's a small engine. But if you look at it next to, an LS, a Gen 3 Hemi, a Coyote, it's about the same size. But again, at Ford, because it was at, the guys just liked the name and they liked the torque curve. He said, wow, the torque curve looks kind of like Godzilla's back. And okay, cool, whatever, So it was just the way the team named it, like Coyote. where did they come up with the name? It was just someone thought it was a cool name to put on it, and that's what he did.
See, you're always learning something new at DragBoss Garage. That's one of my little key phrases I have there. So thank you for sharing that with us. I appreciate that. Let's see what Trunk Back Jim says. Creative Works Inc. here in Des Moines makes a billet Godzilla intake for boosted applications.
Yes, they do. As a matter of fact, I'll have one on dyno probably in about 2 or 3 months now, because I have a customer, John Jennings, that we're doing a motor for, and he's going to be using that intake with a Pro Charger on his. So we'll see how that works out. Yeah, it looks very nice piece. Creative Works has a lot of really cool stuff.
I have to get a copy of that dyno video and put it on here at DragBoss Garage. It'd be kind of cool to have on there.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Definitely. Blizzard, it's good to see you. Kind of brings us in. Will the Godzilla ever be supercharged and put into the Cobra Jet?
I don't think so.
Stock or experimental?
No, because it's an interesting, it's a little bit of an interesting dilemma, because to go into a new Cobra Jet, they have to do a new Cobra Jet. I don't think they're going to do a new Cobra Jet. So I don't see it going into, you can't put it in there retroactively into the 2019s, right? So
yeah,
I think it would have been cool if it could have, but it didn't happen. If they do a new Cobra Jet, I predict they will put it in there one way or another, but we have to see what they do. But they're going to run the factory X cars, with the same engines that are in the factory showdown cars.
Thanks, Todd, for that question. So what was the last year of Cobra Jets? 2018?
2019.
2019.
Yeah, they didn't. The 2018 they didn't get out in enough time, so it actually was a 2019.
Okay. Now, what that have was that had a coyote in it, right?
It did. A
Like
supercharged coyote.
Made like 1,000 horse or something.
Well, I'm sure it made more than that.
Did it really?
Yeah.
It's deep in the 8s, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, well, the factory showdown guys use a variant of that engine because, again, there's a couple different engines in the guide for 2019, and the factory X guy or the factory showdown guys, I think they're probably 1,500 or 1,600 horsepower. I mean, think about it. It's a 3,550-pound car on a 9-inch tire running 760s.
Wow. It's like, how do they, definitely engine management, how do they get the traction? They must kill the timing way down or something. I don't know. 9-inch tire.
9-inch tire. Yeah.
Michael Thompson again. Brian, does the stock head gasket deform into that saw cut, effectively keying itself in place?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. Because it's a multi-layer steel head gasket, so it's just all the embossments are where they need the sealing. So all the engines I took apart, it never deformed into the saw cut.
Thank you. Jim McCann. Hi, Tim and Brian. I joined late, so I apologize if this was already asked. Do you know anyone or anyone either at Ford or private that would have the JC? Well, we know about that. We talked about that. JC51 Pro Stock heads and blocks. I forgot the guy's name, but he bought all the parts from Ford, is what Darren told me, and has one running engine. Yeah,
I don't know. Again, we didn't talk about where someone might be able to get the parts previously, but I would say, yeah, if someone was interested, the probably try to get a hold of Darren, and he might be able to hook them up if he wanted those parts.
It's a lot of work to get one together, though. There's not a lot of parts for them and support.
Absolutely, yeah. It's not an easy build.
Hi, Tim and Brian. Great show and information. Thanks, Gary. And that's the thing. I appreciate, again, Brian, for you taking the time to be with me. Who am I? Tim Halstead, a little guy in his garage that loves Fords and, wants to get a record of the history that we have down there. That's what I'm trying to do, make a video type history. So I appreciate you guys being here and taking time from your families, whatever you guys do, for advocations and spending it here with Brian and I. So thank you guys. I appreciate that.
Yep. Myself as well.
Ramon Tubbs. Hey, it's good to see you. Brian, how do you feel about the 6.8 Godzilla with a shorter stroke?
I think the 6.8, again, I think it's a smart move. Basically, the 6.8 took place of the 6.2. So it's going to be a real nice option, and it's again going to bring a lot more parts in the market, for people. So that one's going to, I think it has a cast crank, not a forged crank in it. But again, the cast cranks can still, put up with a lot of power. So if you have a class that you're going to be limited on cubic inches, it might be something worth looking at. The nice thing is, from a package perspective, all the other components it takes to put that engine in the vehicle, they'll all be the same. So the interface, so you won't be able to tell the difference externally from looking at it.
And we kind of visited this. We'll say it again. Perry Ford, thanks for being here. They only have one running motor that I know, one engine. So I don't even know if NHRA would let that in. I don't know how they do other regulations for that kind of thing.
Yeah, I don't know either. And again, as you said, because, those castings and all that was done in 2009-ish, 9, 10 in that time frame. So, all those, those are really premium parts, both the 50 and the 51. And, but again, if you're going to put it together, it's a custom, you have to go to Jessel or Darren or whoever, did this first engine that has it together and running. And, where did they get the valve train? How am I going to get pieces for that? How am I going to get a crankshaft made for it?
Right.
I called a company yesterday about a custom crank for a friend, not for something I'm working on. I said, boy, if we haven't done the crank yet, it's going to be, at least, a year, maybe, if we want to do it, and it's going to be $14,000, so yeah, so it's, unfortunately, it's just as good as it might, and as much potential as it might have. It's going to be very, costly to actually do it.
And Perry, if you watch my live chat with Darren Morgan when the Pro Stock, you'll get some pictures of the engine. You can get some information on that. $14,000 for the crankshaft?
Well, not for that engine. That was if you just called and it was one they didn't make yet.
Yeah.
What it would take to get it.
Jesus. And I think Todd's asking this question again, but I think that's what we were talking about, maybe. Thoughts on factory experimental? I can't wait till Gainesville. Ring a bell?
Yeah, no, the Factory X stuff is going to be really cool. Okay. I'm more anxious because what happened is when NHRA set the class up, unfortunately, they put a rule in it that it has to, I think, be a 2018 or 19 or later body. So there were already some cars out there that would have had the right chassis and been able to get to minimum weight already built. But because they put that rule on it, everybody had to build a new car that wanted to participate. So, the first few races will probably be interesting, but may not be a lot of participants, right? Because I know, like Chris Holbrook's car, he was waiting forever to get the quarter panels and roof panels to get the car done. Now I know he has them. I think it's being built, and I'm not sure when he'll have it out. Jeff Turk's doing a drag pack that's a lot of people are talking about. I haven't heard about the status of the other cars, but the factory experimental class, for those that aren't aware of it, it's kind of, if people describe it most commonly, is it's back to the roots of Pro Stock originally. So these are going to be, they're going to be full tube chassis, just like a Pro Stock car, big tires. It's factory quarters, factory roof, and any of the carbon fiber parts have to meet factory dimensions. So it's not like, the long extended noses and the shape set. If you took all the decals out, but you might not know what it is. I mean, it's clearly a Challenger. It's clearly a Camaro. It's clearly a Mustang. There's, they will externally look exactly like the production cars, but they're going to weigh, I think, 2,650 pounds, so about 900 pounds lighter than the factory showdowns. Liberty transmissions. So, you know, they're going to be some low 6-second cars. It's going to be really cool to watch.
I love that stuff. Thanks, Todd. I'll have to try to get a hold of Mike Holbrook.
Chris Holbrook.
Or Chris, yeah.
Chris.
Talk to him, maybe get him on here.
He'd be great because, you know, obviously, you know, his you know, he's a second generation.
Yeah. Captain Cobra Jet.
Yep.
Carl Holbrook. Yeah, that'd be nice. If you know him, put in a good word. I'll call him tomorrow.
Okay.
Mr. Wills, DBG Garage. Good to see you, my friend. Tim and Brian, great live. The information and topics are awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. There's 105 people watching right now. So listening in. That's nice. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
George Dreesh. Did you or Ford have involvement with Buddy Ingersoll and his 2.3 turbo motors back in the day?
I don't know. I'm sorry. I don't know. Could have, but maybe not. I don't know.
I can remember that, and I think it was in a Pinto, actually. It was a red Pinto, candy-colored Pinto. That's what he's talking about. Tom Hamilton. Have you got the black Mustang close to your target? What is the first event planned to compete in?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. So for people that don't know the black Mustang, the black Fox body is the one that run with the Godzilla in it. We had it set up last year, targeting to run Ultra Street / NMCA, NMRA Extreme Street Renegade class. The problem is the maximum cubic inches in that class is 440. So I needed a D-stroke crank. I'm still waiting for that crank. Calais is making it. But again, you know, like every other performance parts business, you know, things sometimes get delayed. So I don't have that crank as of yet. And so my plan is to freshen the motor that's in it, because the motor that was in the car last year had a lot of time on it. So I have a fresh motor that I have to get some time to put together. Right now I'm focused on customer stuff. I got a few backlogs I've got to get through. Once I get those cleaned up, I can get that motor to get fresh motor in the car. And then we're going to bring the weight down about 20, you know, instead of 3050, about 2,800 pounds, 2,825. I think I can get it down to. I'm going to put a slightly bigger Pro Charger on it. And the goal, working with my friends, Jason Lee and Patrick Bardhill, who tuned the car for me, is to make the first Godzilla in the 6s in the quarter mile.
Nice.
So we're already the first and only ones in the 4s, but I know there's going to be a lot of people go faster than that this year. We did a 7-second quarter mile with the car, 772, lifting at 4.95 into the pass. And I think I pulled the chutes early on it as well. And that was just because I was talking to Patrick. He was, you know, tuning the car remotely. He said, asked if anyone ran the 7s yet. I said, no, because the pass before that, where I, you know, did a normal shutdown at the 8th mile, it went like went 810 in the quarter at like, you know, 89 miles an hour or something, because I was actually getting quarter mile ETs, even though I was only running 8th mile with the car. So we did that for fun.
What's the motor in the back behind you?
That's a Pro Charge Godzilla.
Nice.
Yeah, so all we work on here is Godzillas.
There it is, boys. You see it. What is a price for Godzilla crate engine with ECU?
Yeah, I think it depends on what ECU, right? So Ford Performance, I think, has a control pack for it. I don't know the price of that, but the engines themselves, I see them on Summit like for, I think $7,900. And that's a complete engine with exhaust manifolds. And that engine, I don't want to get too deep into this, but when the factory rates an engine, the 430 horsepower from the factory, that's with the complete exhaust system on it, the complete air induction system. So it has catalytic converters, you know, or it has the same back pressure as it would with catalytic converters, mufflers. It has a stock air cleaner and it has a complete front and accessory drive on it. And it's corrected to SAE J1349 atmosphere. Anytime I put an engine on my dyno or any other engine builder, they're always rated to standard temperature and pressure, normally with dyno headers, electric water pump, and no air cleaner. And some guys, depending on the engine, will even put a bell mouth on the throttle body. Okay. If I take a stock engine out of a crate, run it, and of course, that engine is run with as well with the factory calibration in it. So if I take that same engine and I put it on my dyno and correct it to standard temperature and pressure, it'll make about 500 horsepower with headers on it. So that's 70 difference. And it's a big number, but the environmental difference between J1349 and standard temperature and pressure is about 4.5%. And then if you look at air induction losses and exhaust losses versus headers, that's about 10%. So there's about, and then you have, I'll run premium fuel, and I'll run it at 12.8 to 1 air fuel or lambda of about 0.87 with optimum spark in it, and it'll make about 500 horsepower. So pretty stout, from the, just right out of the crate.
Wow. That ECU, can you burn a new chip for that, or can you change that program?
Yeah, I don't mess at all with any of the factory stuff. So I use a system called OBR, my dyno most of the time. Okay. My race car, I've got a Haltech in it. I love the Haltech R5 because it's a fully integrated, it's the only computer in the car. So I hook up the battery to it and the ground, and it controls headlights, it's a power distribution system. Yep. And the ECU and the data logger. So it's really cool. So I got that in the race car, but most of, on the dyno, I use OBR a lot because most of the engines I do aren't, very the customers want something that they just plug it in and play, and it comes with the calibration that goes with it. So I use that a lot. So, Haltech and OBR is what I use mainly. Big stuff, Pro Extreme we've also used, and I haven't used, but I've seen quite a few people are also, so not quite a few, but one guy I know for sure is running a Fuel Tech on one.
I don't know if you have anything to do with this involvement of the electric Cobra Jet.
No, that was I was gone by that.
Yep.
Yeah.
What year did you leave?
End of 17.
End of 17.
Yeah. January, basically my last day was, the day that we broke for the Christmas holiday.
Big party when you left?
No, I'm not one. I don't like a lot of the spotlight. So, I just said, nah, I just like to appreciate everything, but gotta go type of thing.
Stage left, baby.
Yeah.
Brian Kowalchuk. Ford has done a lot of marine engines in its day. Do you think the Godzilla engine will venture in that direction?
Yeah, I can't say much because I got some NDAs signed, but I think that you'll be seeing some company coming out with a marine variation of the engine. That's all I can say, but I think so. I think you'll see that.
There it is. And you didn't hear it from Brian. You heard it from me, DragBoss.
Mm-hmm.
Trunkback Jim. Brian is a legend. All them magazines on my garage shelf prove it. Great job tonight, Tim. Thank you. You are a legend, man. You know it. You're too kind. I love it. And I'm very fortunate that you took my phone call or my message, how we hooked up, and thank you so much.
Thank you for having me on, and thank you, Jim, for the kind words. Appreciate it.
He's humble. There's no doubt. Joel Eaton. I'm going to casting a 671 supercharger intake manifold for a 7.3 Godzilla. What you think about this? Is it a good idea?
Yes. As a matter of fact, one of the guys that I work with, helps me in the shop, is a guy named Jake Heffron, and he is putting a Godzilla in his S10, and he keeps saying he's trying to find a manifold that will work with a 671. So yeah, I know there's one guy that's chomping at the bit for one for sure. So I think that That is a good idea. Yeah, I think a lot of people think it's really cool, especially, absolutely.
There you go, Joe. Get it done. John Salvatore. Thank you, John. $15 he donated to DragBoss Garage. Thank you, Brian and Tim. Saw Brian run the Mustang several times in the early days of 5.0.
Yeah, that was I mean, it was a great time, right? It was a lot of fun. 80s were a cool time, right? Cool music, cool cars,
Well, I'll say.
Yeah. So like I said, and again, Tim, we talked about like the 10-year too late thing, but for me, like I said, the 80s was a big replay of the 60s, right? Because the 80s, there was a rebirth of the muscle cars, and the music was really good. The music of the 60s was really good. In the 70s, the cars sucked, and so did the music, kind of. So, anyways,
I love it. What are you? What kind of? So, if you're 80s, are you like in the metal, like hair bands or any of that? What do you like?
Well, I like, I like a wide variety, but I obviously, who doesn't like AC/DC? Who doesn't listen? Metallica, Def Leppard.
Nice.
I mean, all the
good
Aerosmith,
stuff.
all the. Pardon?
Ozzy.
Yeah, Ozzy, Aerosmith. All the. I even Poison. I like some. So yeah, all that stuff. I mean, it's all fun music. Skid Row. Right?
Yep.
Sebastian Bach, who doesn't like that?
Yeah, there's a lot of drama in that band. They had some good songs, though. I'll tell you.
Yeah.
It's funny to talk about. Here we are talking racing cars and development and engineering, and then we go off to the side and talk about metal. I love it.
Yeah.
Here's an interesting one. Sean Singletary just found a 7.3 with 13,000 miles for sale, $4,500. Guess I'll wait longer.
Laugh out loud. Yeah, no, that's a pretty good deal. And I really love seeing these prices coming, in line, because one of the things when these first came out, and you'd read on, Facebook and the internet and all places, never be cheap at the junkyard. They're not going to make enough of them. Well, they're making over 250,000 a year, right? And I think with the 6.8 coming on and this truck sales is probably, I don't know for sure, so I could be full of shit, but I'm thinking they're going to be making 300 to 350,000 of these things a year going into commercial vehicles. There's going to be a lot of them in the yards, and it's nice. I think that $4,500 is a pretty good price for a 500 horsepower motor that you toss in and go, right?
Yeah, and a little bit of bolt on and some changes, and now you got 700.
Yeah.
This is kind of interesting. EFAB 93. Old guys like the Godzilla are quiet when they see the younger guys running sevens with a stock sealed Gen 3 Coyote.
Yeah, I don't. Again, I don't know about the. Again, I'm not going to say anything bad about Coyote, as I mentioned earlier. I think they're fantastic engines. And the sevens, again, I know the sealed engines I'm thinking the Coyote stock guys are, those are NA motors. But yeah, you put a blower in one. I haven't seen myself one go in the sevens yet, but I wouldn't doubt if they could. Absolutely.
So what do they take these, let's say a Coyote, just for example, sealed motor. So they dyno it, they put on the paint marks, wherever, so you can't change anything. And then they go into
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what he's referring to, EFAB 93, but when he says you see the younger guys, again, I go to the drag strip a lot, right? So I see, I've seen a lot of Coyotes in the 8s, lots of them.
Really?
And if you look at, as I said, the factory showdown guys, they're making 1,500 horsepower, though they're not factory sealed motors, and they're going 760s, right? So there may be guys that have ran that quick. I'm not going to say it hasn't happened, but I'll tell you one thing. I go to the drag strip a lot, and I'm an old guy, and I don't see a lot of them running in the sevens, just like I don't see a lot of junkyard LSs running in the sevens.
Okay.
Right? They happen, and they're out there,
sure.
But it's not like, I hear this more, these type of comments from people that I call information brokers as opposed to information providers. That was another term I got from Jim Clark. about people at Ford. He goes, yep, you got the people that generate the important information and actually do the stuff. And then you got the other guys that grab that information and try to, broker or share it, but they really don't know the details behind it. So, like I said, it's the same thing. But hey, the Coyote's a fantastic engine, and I can't wait to see it in Factory X. And they'll be in the 6s, but they won't be a factory sealed motor.
I like the fact that you swear, say shit and ass and no big deal like we all do. You know what I mean? I always think engineer, pocket protector, 3 pens, 2 different hats,
Yeah, well, yeah, I don't know what happened there. I think when I was in high school, I was in vocation. I told you I took vocation along with the college prep stuff. So I was a draftsman. That's how I worked my way through college. And I had my the drafting instructor. And every Friday we'd go like on a donut run. It was a 2-hour class. So he'd say, hey, kids, go, do a donut run. And he said, yep, Wolfe used to be such a nice guy. He wouldn't say shit if he had a mouthful. Then after 1 week on the job, it was past the fucking donuts. And it's been downhill from there. So
right on. Because we all swear. I mean, if you're a mechanic or a drag racer, you swear like a sailor. That's just how it is.
Yeah.
Todd's got another question. All right, Todd. Thoughts on the Godzilla for road racing? Sure hurts me to see all those LS engines in those Mustang race cars. Will it power the new GT4 Mustang?
Well, again, the Coyote, is the other guy. The Coyote. There's no reason, like people ask me, will it ever go into a Mustang? And like, why would you? It's, the Coyote's in there. It's a light on the nose. It's crashed. It's, emissions legal. It's sold around the world. So don't ever really see that happening in a production basis. But for road racing, someone mentioned Creative Works earlier, and the owner of Creative Works' son races a car called Foxzilla. So it's a Fox body Mustang with a Godzilla in it, Pro Charge, and I know they won their championship this year with that car. So I think it can be good in road racing, as Steve proven.
There it is, Todd. So we'll check it out. I have a sub 1,900-pound big tire Maverick tube chassis if you want to run low 6s.
Maybe. Well, we may be doing a higher. I'm going to make an attempt to make a higher output NA motor this year. I'm going to be working closely with Dave Visner on that. So once we get that done, it's going to be real, and that's going to be a stock cylinder block, stock crank, stock head project. But again, be highly modified. So we'll see how that goes. Because if we make some surprising numbers with that, we may want to put it in a light car and see how that works.
There it is, Todd. I got your number. We'll call you up. I got to put this up. It's my wife.
Aw.
Great show. Love you, baby. And the kids. Now, get this, guys. Here's what she wants.
Is that her way of telling you got to go in for the evening?
Well, I told her I try not to go past we're an hour 38 minutes, 111 people on here. So I try not to go past 2 hours. But just because for, you being out here, I don't want to take you away from your home for 2 hours. I mean, I've been on these things for 3.5 hours, and it just, my back gets tired, my ass gets tired, and it gets to a point where we're not really going anywhere, and I don't want to waste your time.
Yeah.
So that's not a hint. But what she wants me to say is she wants to start a YouTube channel behind the scenes at DragBoss and put some videos up. She wants to start doing some videos. And some of the guys kind of think she's hot, and she is. And I said, you know what? If you want to try doing some videos, let's see what you can do. See if you can get some subscribers. So if you guys want to subscribe to her when she makes a channel, go for it. It'll be fun. So thank you.
Good idea.
Love you, baby. Now here's something that we were talking about. And I had talked to you about this, about the lifter failure.
Mm-hmm.
The roller lifters having issues at 35 and 38,000 miles. And we had talked about this, and I think it's important that you mention this.
Yeah. So Yeah, and again, I've seen. Yeah, let's go about the lifters because it is worth talking about.
Sure.
So, again, being out of Ford for as long as I have, I don't have firsthand knowledge of what the failures are and what they've seen, other than what like you've seen on the internet where people are putting those up. And I believe they're real, and I believe those failures are happening. But like anything else or any other production engine that's out there, I mean, we can point to where there's probably been a supplier quality issue. When you look at those lifters, you can see that they're Burnelling, or the material on the lifters pushing out, and basically from an overload or an under strength condition of that roller is what it looks like to me. So that being said, I've also put some stuff out on some of the built engines. So again, we talked about Bob and his son at the Foxzilla car. So they found a lifter failure that doesn't look a whole lot different than what we've seen in these videos. So I'm going to go in two different directions. One, yeah, these failures happen. I hate it. I even wake up at night, even to this day, being retired for over 5 years, thinking about it, because who wants to see somebody that has a new vehicle, 20,000, 50,000, 80,000 miles that has a lifter failure, and especially on these commercial vehicles where these guys lose their livelihood while that truck's in the shop being repaired. And I don't want to take that lightly. My guess is it was probably some type of supplier quality issue, because there's so much validation we do, but sometimes the process goes out of control, out of the control parameters, and parts are made that don't meet design intent. But on this other motor that I talked about, the Foxzilla one, so that's a boosted motor. So when you're opening those exhaust valves, lots of extra force to do that. We had more spring load on it because it needed for the RPM it had, and I had a pretty aggressive cam in it. That I didn't build the motor. Bob and his team built it, but I supplied the parts based on the development work that I did for him to use with this ProCharge motor. So he failed, had a similar issue. And I had another customer with a ProCharge motor that I'd built. And I said, look, I had this customer happen. I need to see your motor. He already had it. I took it off the dyno. He had it in the car, and I said, I need the motor back. I got to look at your lifters, make sure we're okay. But I think I want to change them out. So I got his back, and it had less time on it than Bob's. Bob said, I had 20 hours of beating the shit out of this thing. This motor didn't have that much time. And I saw just the beginning of Burnelling of those stock lifters. So what I'm doing on all the boosted motors I build now, I put a Johnson lifter in, the 2126, and then I select fit the push rods, because that's a low travel lifter, so I have to select fit. And there's no I still run the stock rockers, so to get the preload right on those hydraulic lifters, we sort those and to get the preload within the tolerancing Johnson's looking for. And so that's what we do. So long-winded answer to a pretty direct question, but I'm not worried about longevity in the field with those things, with lifters that are meeting design intent. On the other hand, when you put a lot more load on them than was intended from the factory, it's probably a good idea to put a better lifter in it.
So the lifters that are in it, does Ford make all the parts, the roller wheel, all the bearings?
No, they're supplier. Ford lost, like all the companies, lost vertical integration, half a decade, half a century ago. It's so that's why you got suppliers out there making VCT units, pistons. Ford makes blocks, heads, and they don't even make the castings anymore, right? Because we sold all the casting facilities when Jack Nasser was there. So, but we machine the blocks, the heads, the cranks, the cams, and the connecting rods. They call them the 5 Cs. Valve covers, intake manifolds, valve springs, valves, push rods, oil pumps, oil pans, front covers, all that's supplier made.
I didn't know that. I thought Ford
Yeah,
did everything.
that's pretty much true for all the OEMs.
Really?
Yeah.
It's good to know. So when you look about it, I mean, look at the materials that's out there and all the quality control issues. So you get it from a supplier that is supposed to meet Ford's specs. You don't know. I mean, you're not X-raying any of them or doing any quality control on them, are you?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. It depends on the parts in the factory. But like I think again, all OEMs, you can look and you can see issues like the displacement on demand. All the lifter failures we've had on those. But I'll go to another case in point. About a year ago, it was pretty in the press where there's like 27 2.7 liter Broncos twin turbos where they had a valve failure. They were talking about that.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you that same supplier had a valve issue. Same thing. Process got out of statistical process control when I was there, and had some engine failures. So it gets very, very frustrating. Being the OEM and having a supplier issue, especially a second issue of the same type of, even if it's 8 years apart, doesn't matter. It shouldn't happen.
Right. Now this is kind of interesting because I never thought about this. Adrian, he's from New Zealand. Hope Ford isn't buying Chinese lifters. Do they put foreign parts in a Ford engine?
Absolutely, yeah, for sure. Everybody does, but the lifters, I'm pretty sure those are sourced in the U.S. But there's a lot of parts that are made globally. And I can't tell you where each and every part's made off the top of my head. Lots of stuff made in the U.S., but there's stuff that also comes from other countries as well. But again, still having to meet the specs,
sure,
and the design requirements.
Yeah, I didn't know any of that. I thought Ford made everything. Interesting.
Not since Henry was around.
Yeah. He wouldn't allow it, I bet,
Yeah. Well, like I said, for those that, again, Ford history, right? You talked about the doubling the wage over one day. But the other thing is, we talk about manufacturing and technology today, and it is fantastic. And that's one of the reasons I think you see so many fast cars with CNC porting, with aftermarket cylinder head castings and quality and all that stuff. Really great. But just think back to the 1920s. No computers, no cell phones, not many phones. Iron ore in one side of the Rouge plant, raw iron ore. 3 days later, that was a finished car coming off the end of the line. I mean, it's mind-boggling to me to think about what Henry and his team accomplished back that many, 100 years ago.
And they have videos of the Rouge plant. Have you ever seen the videos on YouTube?
Yeah.
It's amazing to see those blocks coming down, those flathead blocks, 4 cylinders, and they're, every guy's doing something. It's just amazing to watch that history.
Yeah.
I love that.
It's really cool. Absolutely. But I want to say one thing. I did mention that, but to me, just real quick, as a divergence on the Godzilla and allow the Coyotes, apply to Coyotes too, although I'm not doing those motors. But, I've been racing Ford since I was 16, so I still have that Cobra Jet. But, I diverge into all kinds of parts that didn't come on the car from the factory, right? Whether it's aftermarket heads, aftermarket cranks to get different strokes. And like the last car I raced was an X275 car before I started to race the Godzilla. So it was a billet block, SC1 heads. There wasn't one Ford part in that engine. The only thing that was Ford was the bore offset bank and the bore offset and the bore spacing, because even the deck height was different. Right. So for me to be at this age to go back and say, I'm running a stock block casting, a stock head casting, stock crankshaft, and these parts are able to go together and work like this is really, exciting, to me. And I know there's going to be aftermarket parts and heads, and the rest of it's going to develop just like it does for every other motor. But it's pretty exciting to run all 4 parts again and see how they work, or how good they can work.
Ford, quality, job one,
Yeah.
Great show, guys. Thanks. I appreciate that. And Brian, the new banner looks cool.
Well, thank you. Yeah. Yeah, my wife had that sign made for me. And
what does that say? Does it say Wolf Pack?
no, it's at the top it says join the pack.
Okay.
So that's like the W from that. If I spell Willis Performance, we put the wolf's head in the W.
Nice.
So then she blew that up and had that done.
You got any merch?
I do, but I don't. The tough thing for me is, I'm kind of a one-man shop, right?
Yep.
1.5-man shop, because I have, Jake that comes in and helps part-time. So like I tell people, if I'm sweeping the floors, I'm not putting engines together. If I'm cleaning the toilets, I mean, you do everything from, engine, cleaning the engines, assembly, the blueprinting, the dynoing, the shipping, so there's only so much you can do. So we don't do a lot of merch, or I don't really do any merch sale. I have stuff, but that is, normally just kind of give out to people if I'm at the track or, a customer comes by.
Nice.
Just hard to do everything. No shipping and receiving department.
Well, my wife said that she wants to start, like I said, doing a channel, but she said she wants to help me because that's what I want. I'm getting to the point where I want to have a membership, get some T-shirts, pens, or whatever it is, and kind of advertise. So she said she's going to help me with that. So maybe I can get her on board with you.
There you go.
Thank you. Brian, cool. You got a cool last name. There's no doubt about that. Thank you, Tim and Brian. Great information. Thank you. We'll like this one here from George. Information broker equals shit talker. Couch Commandos. Loves analogy.
Yeah. Thank you.
Simple and sweet, baby. Tom Hamilton, thanks for the great show. I'm glad you guys are here. I appreciate that. And it's funny because you know what? This is really the new TV. YouTube, this stuff, these live chats and videos. I haven't watched TV in 14 years. I do watch YouTube videos, but it's for the new entertainment, really. So thank you.
Yep.
Jim M. Brian, are you going to be selling long block 7.3s?
Probably not. We do complete motors. I like to dyno everything I do before it leaves, because you want to know, if there is an issue, you want to identify it, right? And so a lot of times, like when I sell the engine and the ECU, I run the customer's wiring harness, sensors, ECU on the dyno, so that we know everything works. So I don't plan on doing long blocks. I am doing one, just because the guy was such an easy guy to work with and talk to, and he was just going to buy parts and do it himself. And then he said, well, what if you charge if you just put it together? I told him, and he said, I may just have you put it together. And it's like, I said I wouldn't do this, but there's different people you run into when you're building engines or in any business, and some of them you can tell off the top that you want to deal with them, and there's some that you're hoping they're going to make a call to somebody else. But this guy was really nice, so we're doing that. But we are going to be, once I'm trying to get this backlog of engines cleared out. I'm not taking much on a new. I'm cleaning out my backlog, trying to put together, kind of take a page out of the 1960s Ford Total Performance catalog and say, hey, if you want a 500 horsepower Godzilla, it's stock, it's ready to go as it is. If you want to make 600 horsepower, here's the parts kit, and here's what you'll make. If you want to make 650, this is it. If you want to make 700 or 750, or we'll see where that takes us, here's the parts that you'll need. And we know they work together because we've tested them and evaluated them here. So kind of put that list together and try to put, so the guys can do the work themselves, as opposed to having me to have to build it. It's a pretty simple motor.
Nice. Thank you. Andy from New Motorsports Garage. Night, guys. Thank you, Brian and Tim. Thanks for the history. Thank you for being here, Andy. We appreciate it. So kind of winding down. I'm kind of see if there's some other questions that we can. Oh, here's a good one. Eric McMahon, Andrea Halstead. Get Tim to buy a Godzilla engine to put in a grocery getter. I'm adding it to the list.
There you go.
Because I got a couple cars we can put it in. It'd be kind of a fun project to do. Ben Rosbach. All the Halsteads are hot. A family like you guys is just plain hot. Thanks, as always. Thank you. And that's one of the things that I don't know about other YouTube channels, but I told you I have a couple little girls, 7 and 11, and I get them out here when they want to come out here, I can talk them into it because I want them to learn how to take engines apart. They've already pulled oil pans and that kind of stuff. My 7-year-old's helped me build a C4 transmission right now. This is the stuff that they don't teach you this anymore. This is a craft that you have to keep perpetual in your family or friends to keep it going, I think. What are your thoughts on that? Kids getting involved.
Yeah, no, I think, you always hear there's less and less people, involved going on. But, it is nice when you go to the track and you do see people that are, in their 20s and, late teens or early 30s that are still involved. So there's less people, involved, but I think it's great, when you do have kids and they want to, look at it and watch what's going on and learn. It makes it a lot more fun for sure.
Oh,
But
yeah.
I mean, some of the, depending on where you live in the country, some of there's less emphasis on, the vocational classes and, and doing things that are important, or is micro, going to, the dirty jobs or, the jobs that make the country move, whether it's mechanics, whether it's pipe fitters, whether it's welders, it's, there's a lot of really wonderful ways to make a great living for a family other than, going to school and going, the school route. So I think learning how to do this is great.
Somebody will pick it up somewhere along the line. What is it like trying to get performance-related stuff made or projects done inside Ford back in the day?
It depends, because again, a lot of it was based on relationships, so, depending on who was there, like one of the guys that I worked with, the guy is super smart, still at Ford, his name's Adam Christian, and he was helping the Ford, he was working in computer modeling of engines, and he knew all that stuff inside and out, all the deep technical modeling work. And the guys in Ford Performance were having some issues with power on the NASCAR stuff. So he did a lot of modeling and came up with a different header design. And then he built the headers and sent them to the NASCAR team to test. He built them at night on his own time in his garage. Wow. And so, again, it takes sometimes that special person to be the guy answering the question, to really, get stuff done. So a lot of it, like I said, it was based on relations and having the right person, in the right spot to get excited about doing it.
Thank you. Now, I'm not sure about this. Adrian from New Zealand. Good to see Cletus using the sump you sent because I told him you were the Zilla guy.
Yeah, so yeah, Cletus is it's funny because when he got the started work on the Godzilla stuff, I remember people were putting us a page, hey, who should I go to get help with Godzilla that actually has done the work, I think the vast majority of the answers was directing him to me, but he didn't contact me at first, but then he's got a lot of folks that he's worked with on his stuff, so he's got his networks put together of people that he works with that I obviously respect. But he asked me a couple questions here and there that I helped with, and then he was having a hard time getting a short oil pan. And there's a company named 417 Motorsports that makes a nice pan for it, but they make them, I think, in batches. They didn't have any on the shelf for him. So I ended up having one from a company called Danbury Competition Engines. So he called me, said, do you have one? I said, I don't have a 417 pan, sorry. And then I thought, oh yeah, I got this one on the shelf that's been sitting there for about 8 months, but it's not the 417, but I think it'll work for you. Mm-hmm. So I called them and said, hey, let me ship it to you. If you want to use it, great. If you don't, just ship it back. So, and he's really, obviously he's extremely successful, very entertaining, real smart dude. But the thing that really surprised me was he was very worried about getting me paid for that. He sent me, making, it's like, well, what do I owe you? I said, first see if you want to use it. If you don't want to use it, we're not going to worry about it, And then, yep, we're going to use it. What do I owe you? How do I get you paid? Where do I send it? So I thought that was pretty unique, because a lot of the guys in channels like that, you may have the impression that they're just looking for stuff, for free because of who they are, and that wasn't the case. So I was pretty impressed with that.
Nice. There you go, Chris. Hell yeah, brother.
Yep.
The Anonymous one, $5. Thank you, my friend. Sorry I didn't catch you earlier. You can catch it on the replay. I'm glad you're here. I appreciate that. Thank you, my friend. I'm looking for a couple more questions, and we'll kind of cut it down. This one, I think he might be talking about your Fairlane. Let's see. So you said you had a Cobra Jet. Is it stock, or did you modify it? And what does it run now?
Okay, guy. Well, I had my first Cobra Jet was that I still own, the 1969 Fairlane Cobra that we're doing a resto mod on, or will be doing, and that's going to have a Godzilla in it. Believe it or not, it's taking the FE out and putting that in. But I also own a 2010 Cobra Jet Mustang that has this 428 variant in that. So it's a push rod, Windsor-based 428, and that's run like 940s.
Nice.
Yeah.
Another quick one. Let's see. Are you going to Bradenton in March from Michael Thompson?
No, I don't think I'll be ready. I really wanted to get out early this year, but not getting the crankshaft kind of threw me for a loop. So I kind of pouted a bit, and we're going to go plan B and try to get this 6-second run, but I don't think I'll be out probably until May.
Michael Thompson. Tim, how about the world's first Godzilla swapped in a 1940 Ford Coupe? Hey, I got the car. We can fit it in there, I bet. See, now the list, now I got to add that on there. That's a project. Thank you. This may not be in your wheelhouse, but Ford will be teaming up with Red Bull Racing and Formula One in 2026. Do you see Ford becoming a works team in the future?
I don't know. I just not think. I don't know. Yeah. Sorry.
There you go. So let's get ready to end it now. It's been a little over 2 hours. I want to give you a big thank you, Brian, for taking the time with me and our subscribers here.
Yeah,
I appreciate
that. I know I appreciate you guys being interested in some of the stuff I can share, and like I said, I think it's always makes you feel good when you can talk about stuff that you've done, and people are interested. So I appreciate the interest in having as many people join as you did throughout the evening. Thank you.
We have about 110 or 112 people at one time, so that's a pretty good audience. So thank you so much. We're going to end it there, guys. So remember, you're always learning something new at DragBoss Garage.